It's hard to draw a straight line between, oh, this was misreported, therefore those other people are dead. But we can say that the picture of what is going on is frequently misleading.
Sometimes it's a lack of resources. Sometimes it's a lack of insight or regional knowledge. And sometimes it's very proactive agenda being pushed.
Many of the journalists are so secular in their mindset that they are very reluctant to interpret things in religious terms, and they only want to look at it in purely socio-economic terms. Now, when you do that, you fail to understand the real roots of many of the issues confronting us.
When I was growing up, my history teacher said, well, boys, we're not sure what the rest of the 20th century has to offer, but something we know for sure, organised religion is not going to be important so much for history teachers. Yeah. And who would have thought it? And certainly when I was doing history of Britain, the greatest challenge was to dive into these kind of scream-filled caves of sectarian madness. But it had to be done. And it's unbelievably relevant to now. You know, absolutely. Yeah. There was always the sense in which, because we read our great social historians of the 17th century, Christopher Hill and so on, that religion was kind of something that was instrumentally glued on to what was really class interest. Well, you know, to live now actually is to understand that it actually shapes allegiance. It's not just simply a reflection of it.
The religious dimension is still very important in most parts of the world. I think that trying to understand some of the complexity of religion and the role that it plays in global affairs is part of your training and understanding as a journalist in order to be able to tell the story well and accurately.
The thing is that religion is presented as something pre-modern. And so if we are thinking about Islam, it's presented as being anti-British.
With The Sun, they had a headline on the murder of an 84-year-old woman in London. And I thought this was grossly irresponsible reporting because there was no evidence connection between the convert's religious beliefs and his homicidal actions.
Historically, religion has often evolved to oppose or certainly find sanctuary from violence. Now, this position is not unique to different strands of Christianity. And my view is that one can find it in, say, Buddhism and certainly branches of Islam, for example, Sufism.
Earlier this year, I was in Iraq. I was reporting on Iraqi Christians who had to flee from ISIS, as thousands and thousands and thousands of others were as well. Mostly persecuted because of their religion and their sect of their religion. And there's a lot of that happening these days here. So it does help to know what you're talking about when you have Sunni and Shias and Yazidis and Shabaks and Ahmadiyans and different kinds of Christians. It helps to know who and what they are and have a little bit about them.
Journalists, I feel, should reflect multiple motivations that cause it, rather than relying on sort of easy explanations like religious fanaticism.
We see this again with ISIS, despite its explicit statements and the videos it puts out. There's always a tendency to try and explain what it's doing in ways which leave out the religious dimension or treat it as simply epiphenomenal. So people still relate that to the Israeli-Palestinian question, though ISIS regards nationalism as a form of apostasy, so it doesn't support any particular country looking for a Palestinian state.
So to understand each attack, you have to get into the mindset of the group that carried out that attack and not try to make broad generalizations about jihadis or extremists or fundamentalists. These are very different people, very different groups with very different arguments about how they should be carrying out their warfare. But if you watch the news, it's really hard to see that. Understanding their arguments, in fact, it means that you have to understand their ideology, and in some cases, understand theological arguments that they are having with the rest of the Islamic world.
There is no one Islam across the world. It's a dynamic, multiple, and geographically diverse phenomenon.
More needs to be done in terms of the mainstream media to make that distinction between Muslims that have a clear political agenda and harbour illiberal views and those who are progressive in terms of our beliefs and actions and want to unite communities.
By presenting that variety of perspectives and different sort of takes on what's going on, they are enabling their readers and their listeners to come to their own conclusions.
Kuru Karama is another community in near Jos Plateau State where a lot of Muslims used to live. But by the beginning of the crisis in 2010, the Muslims there did say that about 150 Muslims were killed and their bodies were dumped in the well. And they did invite quite a number of international journalists at that time.
Aid workers who reached the villages of Kuru Karama, Kuru Gadabiyu and Kuru Janta have been describing how they retrieved burnt corpses that were thrown into wells in those communities. Between 100 and 150 people have been discovered in those areas, but many more are thought to remain inside the wells. Human Rights Watch has called for a criminal investigation into the deaths. The group urged the Nigerian government to investigate what it called credible reports of a massacre of at least 150 Muslims.
We went together with the police and the military to Kuru Karama at that time to verify the claims. We went around the community. In the entire community, there were just about 5 wells or 6 or thereabout that we could count. And there was no way any of those wells would have taken 150 bodies. Indeed, there wasn't anybody in any of the wells that we saw. But that story went viral again, and a lot of Muslims really do believe till today that Christians wiped out an entire Muslim community, that Christians in Plateau State are on a genocide mission to exterminate Muslims. The same story was discussed on a political level in Bauchi State. Now, what they did in the State House of Assembly was to discuss that, and they took up a position to chase out all indigents of Plateau State from Bauchi State for the genocide against Muslims that they have seen that was coming in from Jos.
I think it's very dangerous putting in a narrative and then working to fulfill that narrative rather than reporting on what's actually there.
Sensationalist reporting is dangerous. It may sell various media products for profit, but it also has the potential to misinform and charge emotions to a boiling point.
In October of 2011 was that there was a very peaceful march by Christians in Egypt. They went past a government building where there were armed guards and they were mowed down by armored personnel carriers. But the mainstream state television actually was calling for people to go out and protect their military because these Christians were attacking soldiers. Totally misrepresented. It had a lot of incitement to anger. People started to believe this. And it was only weeks, months later that the reality, the truth came out, that these were unarmed, peaceful protesters. That kind of irresponsibility is not just about ratings, it's about lives.
The area of the Crimea is home to a variety of sites which are regarded as especially significant in the Russian Orthodox Church. The idea that the old areas of Russia, that would be now Belarus and Ukraine, which were united not only in one empire under the Tsar Caesar, but were also canonical territory of the Russian Orthodox Church. And you find these themes being repeated in Russian propaganda and in Russian media. The area of Ukraine is not just a power grab to restore the Soviet Union, but is understood to be part of the heartland of great religious significance. So I think the religious dimensions of that are also being underplayed. The Metropolitan Hilarion, the sort of foreign minister of the Russian Orthodox Church, has been speaking about this, also more recently at the Vatican, in statements to the Eastern Rite Catholic churches of Ukraine and others.
We've got to realize that reporters are paying an incredible cost, even to the extent of those who are recently been abducted and lost their lives.
Inevitably, with deadlines, with time pressures, etc., it can be very hard. One does cut out complex stuff to keep the story simple.
The streets were filled with protesters, with tear gas. We had a 6 o'clock curfew. Most of these churches were outside of Cairo, in small villages that you can't find on Google Maps.
So I think there are a lot of factors that make it very, very difficult to get the right kind of information in the right way from fairly remote and distant places.
Often religious affairs are palmed off in the newsroom, not given the importance they deserve. It's not about whether you're religious or whether your editor's religious. It's about getting the facts straight. It's as simple as that. You wouldn't be sent to court without the full facts. You wouldn't be asked to do a crime report or even a sports report without the full facts. Currently, we're not equipping our young journalists, or indeed our veteran journalists, properly to understand the great myriad of religious affairs there is out there in the modern world. But there needs to be a root and branch look at exactly how religious affairs are taught to young journalists so that they can go into newsrooms properly equipped, which currently, sadly, I believe, they're not at the moment.
I think the media does very good work in many cases, and most people working are very honest and very reliable. But it's these lapses that we see that are detrimental to individuals, communities, and sometimes whole movements and nations.